Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent assigned to watch over mutants. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The Aaron Analysis Wing Delta was a carefully curated cocktail of sterility and recycled oxygen, chilled to a precise 68 degrees Fahrenheit. It smelled of ozone from the humming server racks and the faint, bitter aroma of overbrewed coffee. For Agent Izuku Midoriya, Level 5 Analyst, callsign Deku, it was the smell of home. His station was an island of controlled chaos in an ocean of immaculate order. While his colleagues maintained desks that were paragons of minimalist efficiency, his was a nest. 3 monitors formed a glowing triptych around him, displaying satellite imagery, biometric data streams, and a live feed replay of the Cape Citadel incident. A stack of data slates teetered precariously to his left, and to his right, a worn, analog notebook lay open, its pages filled with a dense, frantic scrawl that was part technical notation, part desperate ideation. He ran the footage for the 20th time. The scene was apocalyptic. A man in a garish purple and red uniform, helmet gleaming under the Florida sun, floated in the epicenter of a maelstrom of twisted metal. Missiles, wrenched from their silos, hung in the air around him like a metallic crown of thorns. The man, identified as the mutant extremist Magneto, was making a speech, but Izuku had the audio muted. The words were for the politicians and the public. The truth was in the physics. Incredible, he muttered, his voice a low hum that was lost in the quiet thrum of the facility. His fingers flew across a holographic interface, isolating a single missile. The magnetic field isn't uniform, it's bespoke. He's not just pulling, he's manipulating the guidance systems on a quantum level. The beryllium copper contacts in the gyroscopes, the neodymium in the fin actuators. He's playing each component like a separate instrument in an orchestra. His pen scratched against the paper of his notebook, a habit that marked him as an anachronism in this digital fortress. Threat Assessment Mitigation Log 14. The title was a dry, S.H.I.E.L.D.-approved label for what he still, in the deepest recesses of his heart, thought of as hero analysis for the future. Name, Eric Lencher, alias, Magneto. Classification, mutant, Omega level potential. Power, ferromagnetism manipulation, gross oversimplification. True capabilities appear to be control over the entire electromagnetic spectrum on a macro and micro scale. Psychological profile. High-functioning sociopathy with messianic complex, rooted in significant childhood trauma. Source, S.H.I.E.L.D. Deep Dive, File 7 Alpha 6. Believes in mutant supremacy as a survival mechanism. Sees humanity as an existential threat. Not inherently evil, but operating on a paradigm of extreme, preemptive self-defense. His actions are not chaotic. They are terrifyingly logical if you accept his premise. Izuku paused, chewing on the end of his pen. He was supposed to focus on weaknesses, on ways to neutralize the threat. That was his job. He'd listed the obvious, non-ferrous environments, focused EMP bursts, psionic disruption. But his mind kept drifting to the why. He had cross-referenced the Cape Citadel attack with a dozen smaller incidents. Vandalized factories producing anti-mutant technology, politicians with anti-mutant stances finding their motorcades inexplicably disabled, a cargo ship carrying mutant-specific restraints being sunk in the mid-Atlantic. There was a pattern, a brutal, violent pattern, but one with a clear, protective ideology at its core. Magneto wasn't just a terrorist. He was a warlord fighting a war only he seemed to fully comprehend. A small, amber light pulsed silently on the bezel of his primary monitor. It was a summons, not the general alert klaxon that signified a base-wide threat, nor the blinking blue light of an incoming message from his department head. This was the discreet, insistent amber reserved for direct communication from a handler. His handler. He saved his report with a final, typed addendum. Subject's convictions are absolute. Conventional deterrence will fail. Engagement requires ideological counterargument, not just superior firepower. Recommend further study into the root causes of mutant radicalization. He knew that last part would be ignored, flagged by an algorithm as sentimental fluff and routed to a digital circular file. But he had to write it. It was his duty not just to analyze the weapon, but to understand the hand that wielded it. Report finished, Deku? The voice, calm and even, came from behind him. Izuku didn't jump. Years of training had sanded away such tells, but a wire of tension still pulled taut in his shoulders. He turned his chair slowly to face Agent Phil Coulson. Coulson looked exactly as he always did, impeccable in a dark, tailored suit, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. He held 2 cups of coffee. He offered one to Izuku. I saw you were still logged in, Coulson said, his eyes glancing at the screen, which Izuku had just blanked. Figured you could use this. Your magneto-analysis has been making waves upstairs. It's just data, sir, Izuku replied, accepting the cup. The warmth was a welcome sensation against his perpetually cold fingers. It's never just data with you, Midoriya, Coulson corrected, using his real name, a small gesture of familiarity reserved for their private conversations. Other analysts see a hostile asset with a specific power set. You see a traumatized idealist with a physics-defying ability to weaponize his environment. It's a different, more holistic perspective. Is that a problem? Izuku asked, his voice betraying a hint of defensiveness. Not for me, Coulson said, taking a sip of his own coffee. But it gets you noticed. Which brings me to this. He nodded toward the amber light. The director wants a personal debrief. Briefing room 7. Now, the bottom dropped out of Izuku's stomach. In his 3 years with S.H.I.E.L.D., recruited straight out of an advanced studies program at 16 for his freakish analytical abilities, he had never once met Director Nick Fury. The director was a myth, a shadow that moved on the highest levels of global security. You heard his name in hushed tones. You saw his authority in the missions that appeared on your slate, stamped with the Stark, single eye patch insignia. You did not, as a level 5 analyst who spent most of his life in a glorified server farm, get personally debriefed by him. Sir? Is my report that bad? Coulson's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. On the contrary. It's that good. And it's that terrifying. Come on. The director doesn't like to be kept waiting. The walk through the Triskelion was a study in controlled intimidation. The S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters was less a building and more a vertical city-state, a monument of steel and smoked glass thrusting into the sky above the Potomac. Agents in tactical gear moved with silent, predatory grace. Scientists in lab coats conversed in jargon-laced torrents. The air hummed with a power that had nothing to do with quirks or mutant abilities. It was the power of information, of global reach, of secrets. Izuku felt like a ghost in the machine. He was quirkless. A zero. A statistical anomaly in a world where 80% of the population had some kind of superpower, from being able to bend a spoon with their mind to leveling a city block. His quirklessness had been the defining tragedy of his childhood, the reason his hero dreams had withered and died. But S.H.I.E.L.D. hadn't seen a tragedy. They'd seen an asset. He couldn't be hacked by mental quirks, wasn't susceptible to power-copying abilities, and his presence registered as a complete blank to energy sensors. He was the perfect observer, a human control group. His call sign Deku, once a cruel taunt from his childhood bully meaning useless, had been repurposed by S.H.I.E.L.D. To them, it meant a blank slate, the unassuming pawn that could get closer to the king than any knight or rook. He hated the name, but he wore it like armor, a constant reminder of what he had to overcome. They arrived at a heavy, metallic door marked only with a simple, engraved 7. Coulson placed his hand on a biometric panel. It scanned, chimed, and the door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. The room was circular, cold, and dominated by a large, black table that seemed to absorb the light. The only illumination came from a soft glow emanating from the table's surface and the panoramic window that offered a stunning, vertiginous view of the city below. 2 figures stood by the window, their backs to the door. One was a woman with severe, dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, her posture ramrod straight, Commander Maria Hill. The other was a tall, imposing man in a long black leather coat. Even as a silhouette, he commanded the space. As the door sealed behind them, the man turned. Director Nick Fury. The eye patch was real. The scarred, unblinking glare was more intense than any file photo could ever convey. He didn't look at Coulson. His one good eye locked directly onto Izuku, and it felt like being pinned by a laser sight. Agent Midoriya, Fury's voice was a low baritone that scraped like gravel. "I've read your file. Top of your class in cryptology, probability theory, and tactical analysis. Recruited at 16. Quirkless, your latest report on Lencher was on my desk an hour ago. I hope it was satisfactory, Director," Izuku managed, his throat suddenly dry. "It was bleak," Fury stated flatly. "It was also the most accurate assessment of the situation I've seen. You didn't just tell me what he can do, you told me why he does it. That's a rare and dangerous quality in an analyst." Commander Hill turned, her expression as unyielding as granite. "The Director means it's a liability. Empathy has no place in threat assessment." "Empathy is a tool, Commander," Fury countered without looking at her. "It lets you predict an enemy's moves. And right now, we are facing an enemy we do not understand." He gestured to the table. The surface flickered to life, displaying a cascade of images and data. News reports of spontaneous power manifestations. Medical scans showing a unique double helix, labeled X gene. Riots in cities where the first mutants had appeared. "Quirks we get," Fury said, pacing slowly around the table. "They're a chaotic variable, but a known one. A lottery. You might get a kid who can talk to squirrels, you might get a kid who can shoot fire from his feet. The world has adapted. Hero agencies, laws, regulations. It's a messy system, but it's a system." He stopped, placing his hand over an image of the X gene. "This is not a lottery. This is an upgrade. A hereditary, evolutionary leap. Scientists are calling them Homo sapiens superior. It means they're not just random individuals with powers anymore. They're the next step. A new species breeding true. And history has taught us one thing about what happens when two different human species occupy the same planet." Izuku's mind raced. He knew the geopolitical implications. The panic in the UN. The secret accords being drafted. The fear of a new arms race where the weapons were human beings. "Which brings us to him," Fury said. A new file appeared on the table. It was a picture of a man in a wheelchair, bald, with a serene, intelligent face. Charles Xavier, PhDs in genetics, biophysics, and psychology from Oxford. The world's most powerful telepath. Izuku's breath hitched. The most powerful? Stronger than the C-list mentalist shield kept on retainer? Stronger than the pro-heroes whose quirks were psionic in nature? Xavier's public profile is that of a philanthropist and a champion of mutant rights, Hill chimed in, her voice crisp and professional. He recently opened a private school in Westchester, New York, the Xavier Institute for Gifted Youngsters. An aerial surveillance photo of a sprawling, beautiful mansion appeared. It looked peaceful, idyllic. "A school for gifted youngsters," Fury scoffed, the word gifted dripping with sarcasm. "A school where he's gathering powerful, adolescent mutants from all over the world. A school with a multi-billion-dollar endowment from unknown sources, protected by diplomatic loopholes and a web of shell corporations. We have no eyes inside. We have no ears. His telepathy makes conventional infiltration impossible. Any agent we send in has their mind read and wiped before they get past the front gate." Fury leaned forward, his hands flat on the table, his single eye boring into Izuku. "Magneto is a fire. He's raging, he's destructive, and he's out in the open. We can fight a fire. But Xavier is a shadow. He's gathering an army of unregistered, weaponized teenagers and teaching them, what? To control their powers? Or to use them? Is he a Gandhi for mutants, or is he a Oppenheimer, building a bomb in secret? I can't afford to guess." The purpose of this meeting slammed into Izuku with the force of a physical blow. His heart hammered against his ribs. "You need an infiltrator," Izuku said, the words coming out as a whisper. "I need a ghost," Fury corrected. "I need someone a telepath of Xavier's caliber might overlook. Someone whose mind is quiet. Someone with no powers to register, no energy signature to flag. Someone who looks and feels like a non-threat. Someone who can pass for a scared teenager whose powers just manifested." "My file says I'm quirkless, Director," Izuku stated, the word tasting like rust. "Exactly," Fury said, a grim smile touching his lips. "And that's your cover. You're not a shield agent. You're Izuku Midoriya, a 17-year-old orphan whose latent quirk has just supposedly manifested. A new type of quirk, one that's hard to pin down. We'll fabricate a minor incident, create a digital breadcrumb trail. Xavier's people will find you, and he will extend an invitation to his school. He'll see a confused, powerless boy. And you will accept. The mission parameters solidified in Izuku's mind, terrifying in their clarity. This was deep cover. No backup, no contact, surrounded by potential hostiles with unimaginable power. A lie he would have to live every second of every day. Your mission, Hill continued, taking over as her tablet lit up, is codenamed Project Chimera. Your objectives are threefold. First, profile all staff and students. Powers, weaknesses, psychological state, threat level. We need to know who and what is in that mansion. Second, identify the purpose of a device our intelligence has codenamed Cerebro. It draws a massive, unique energy signature, and we believe it is key to Xavier's ability to locate mutants worldwide. We need to know how it works and if it can be neutralized or co-opted. Third, and most important, assess Charles Xavier. Is he a potential ally in the coming storm? Is he a naive idealist whose school will become a breeding ground for the next Magneto? Or is he the greatest threat of them all, a puppet master playing the long game? The weight of the assignment pressed down on him, suffocating. He thought of his notebook, of his analyses. He had always been the observer, the one who watched from the safety of his monitors. He diagrammed battles, he didn't fight them. He was a theorist. They were asking him to step through the screen. He saw the faces from the news reports. The fear in the eyes of the humans, the anger and pain in the eyes of the mutants. He saw the path this was on, a path to war, to camps, to a genocide fueled by fear. Magneto was one response. S.H.I.E.L.D., with its cold calculus and talk of neutralization, was another. Both would lead to oceans of blood. Maybe there was a third way. He thought of his childhood dream, the one he had so painfully locked away. The dream of being a hero like All Might, saving people with a smile. This wasn't that dream. This was its dark reflection. It was a mission of lies and betrayal. But the goal, the ultimate goal was the same. To save people. To prevent the worst-case scenario. To stand between two sides and stop them from annihilating each other. This was how a quirkless boy could save the world. Not with a punch, but with a report. Not with a flashy costume, but with a carefully maintained lie. He looked up, meeting Fury's gaze without flinching. His own fear was a distant hum, overridden by a cold, sharp resolve. The spy's burden. He would carry it. I accept the assignment, Director. A flicker of something, respect perhaps, passed through Fury's eye. Good. You'll be handled by Agent Coulson. He'll get you kicked out. You leave in 2 days. From this moment on, Agent Midoriya is a ghost. You are Deku. A scared kid in over his head. You will live it, breathe it, and believe it. Because if Xavier senses one hint of a lie, you won't just be compromised. You'll be a vegetable in a hospital bed for the rest of your life. Dismissed. The transition from sterile briefing room to the organized clutter of an RD quartermaster bay was jarring. This section of the Triskelion smelled of solder and machine oil. Coulson led Izuku to a private alcove where a series of pelican cases sat on a stainless steel table. Your life for the next few months, Coulson said, his tone back to its usual calm. He opened the first case. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a collection of mundane-looking items. A cheap digital watch, a ballpoint pen, a few buttons, a worn-looking backpack. Everything is non-metallic where possible, Coulson explained, picking up the watch. The casing is a carbon polymer composite. The internal electronics are shielded. Standard subvocal comms unit linked to a burst transmission satellite. You speak, it records, and twice a day it will upload your audio log to a secure server. Don't try to make live contact unless it's a world-ending emergency. He pointed to the pen. High-resolution audio-video recorder. Click it once to start, twice to stop. The buttons are wide-spectrum energy sensors. Sew them onto your clothes. They'll passively collect data on any anomalous energy signatures. Like, say, a giant psychic amplifying helmet. Cerebro, Izuku breathed, his analyst's mind already connecting the dots. Exactly? The backpack is lightly armored with a flexible Kevlar weave, just enough to stop a stray bullet or a piece of shrapnel. Won't do much against an optic blast or a lightning bolt, but it's better than nothing. Coulson opened the second case. Inside lay a single, sleek, matte black handgun. A standard-issue night-night gun, Coulson said. Fires concentrated dendrotoxin rounds. Non-lethal takedown for most humanoids. We have no idea what it will do to a mutant's altered physiology. It might do nothing. It might stop their heart. This is your absolute last resort. You are not an combat operative on this mission, Izuku. You are an information asset. Your brain is your weapon. This, he said, tapping the gun, is a panic button you should pray you never have to press. Izuku stared at the weapon. He'd qualified with it on the range, his scores perfect as always. But holding it now, knowing it was his only line of defense against people who could level buildings, made it feel as useless as a paperweight. Coulson seemed to read his thoughts. He closed the case and put a hand on Izuku's shoulder. Hey! Look at me. Izuku met his gaze. The cover is your best weapon and your best shield, Coulson said, his voice dropping slightly. You're not a level 5 agent anymore. You're a kid. You're nervous. You're scared of your new power. You're awkward. Lean into it. All that anxiety you usually keep bottled up so tightly? Let it out. Let them see it. A telepath like Xavier isn't just reading words, he's reading feelings. Your genuine fear will be the most convincing part of your disguise. How can I fool him when I'm lying about the most fundamental thing? Izuku asked, the question heavy with doubt. Because the best lies are wrapped in truth, Coulson replied. You are scared. You are in over your head. You are quirkless and surrounded by people with immense power. Use that. Let him feel that. He'll be so focused on the fear he expects to see, he might just miss the resolve hiding underneath it. Coulson gave his shoulder a firm squeeze. The lines get blurry on missions like this, kid. It's easy to forget who you are. Your mission is to get the intel. But your job is to come home. Don't forget that. Later that night, Izuku stood in his Spartan barracks room. It was a simple, functional space, a bed, a desk, a locker. A single bag lay open on his bed, half-packed with the generic clothes and personal effects S.H.I.E.L.D. had provided for his new identity. The room was a reflection of his S.H.I.E.L.D. persona, efficient, empty, professional. But on the inside of his locker door, hidden from view, was the one piece of himself he never allowed the organization to sand away. It was a poster, old and slightly faded, carefully mounted with magnetic clips. It depicted a towering figure in a vibrant red, white, and blue costume, his smile as bright and powerful as the sun. 2 blonde bangs stood up like rabbit ears, and his shadow fell over a grateful city. In bold, optimistic letters, the bottom of the poster read, I am here, All Might. The symbol of peace. The one hero. The reason a small, quirkless boy once dared to dream he could be a hero, too. He traced the outline of the hero's fist with his finger. That dream felt like it belonged to another person, in another lifetime. He had traded that bright, hopeful path for this one, a road paved with shadows and whispers, secrets and lies. Fury was right. He couldn't be a hero like All Might. The world needed something else now. It didn't need a symbol to rally behind. It needed a spy in the dark to prevent the war that would tear all the symbols down. He remembered Coulson's words. Your genuine fear will be the most convincing part of your disguise. He felt that fear now, a cold knot in his gut. But beneath it, there was something else, a familiar, painful ache. The same ache he felt as a child watching heroes save the day on TV. The desperate, all-consuming need to help. To save. He was being sent to betray the trust of people who might just be scared and alone. He was being armed with lies and deception. But if he could use that position, if he could provide the right information, if he could be the voice of reason in Fury's ear and deflect the worst of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s paranoia, if he could stop the first shot from being fired in a war between humans and mutants, wouldn't that be its own kind of heroism? He wouldn't be able to smile and declare, I am here. No one would ever know what he was doing. His victories would be classified documents. His saves would be averted crises that the world would never even know were coming. He would be a hero no one could see. Slowly, Deliberately, he closed the locker door, plunging the image of All Might back into darkness. He shouldered his new backpack, the weight of his mission settling upon him. His name was Izuku Midoriya. His call sign was Deku. And he had an assignment. The unmarked black sedan, driven by a silent SHIELD agent whose face was as forgettable as his driving was impeccable, turned off the main road onto a private lane. The shift was immediate and profound. The noisy hum of suburban New York faded away, replaced by the hushed whisper of wind through ancient, sprawling oaks. Sunlight, previously a harsh glare on asphalt, now dappled through a thick canopy of leaves, painting shifting patterns on the hood of the car. It was a transition from the mundane world into something else, a place that felt set apart by more than just geography. Izuku Midoriya sat in the back, his hands clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles were white mountains on a pale landscape. He was wearing the clothes SHIELD had provided, slightly worn jeans, a generic gray hoodie, and scuffed sneakers. He looked like any other teenager being shipped off to a new school, a bundle of nerves and uncertainty. It was a perfect costume, because the nerves were real. They were a cold, churning sea in his stomach, and he was letting them show, just as Coulson had advised. Let the fear be the first line of defense. His analyst's mind, however, was running a separate, colder protocol. He catalogued the security measures, or rather, the deliberate lack thereof. The road was unmonitored by visible cameras. There were no motion sensors he could detect, no pressure plates, no laser grids. It was either outrageously poor security, or a sign of supreme confidence. Given the file on Charles Xavier, Izuku was betting heavily on the latter. The real security wasn't on the fence line. It was in the mind of the man who owned the property. The trees finally parted, and the mansion came into view. The file photos had not done it justice. It wasn't just a building, it was a statement. A sprawling edifice of stone and slate, with ivy crawling up its walls like a living tapestry. Dormer windows peeked from the roof, and a grand, circular driveway swept before a massive set of oak doors. It was old, elegant, and radiated a sense of history and permanence. It looked less like a school and more like a castle from a fairy tale. A beautiful, deceptive cage. The car crunched to a halt on the gravel. The driver didn't say a word, simply put the car in park and stared straight ahead. This was the drop-off point. From here, Izuku was on his own. He took a deep breath, the air tasting sweet and clean, full of the scent of cut grass and blooming roses. He pushed the door open and stepped out. The car doors shut behind him with a solid, final thud. A moment later, the engine purred to life, and the sedan pulled away, leaving him alone in the immense silence of the estate. He stood there for a full minute, a small, solitary figure dwarfed by the mansion's grandeur. He adjusted the straps of the Kevlar-lined backpack, its familiar weight a small comfort. This was it, the threshold. The moment Agent Midoriya vanished and the scared, confused teenager with a latent quirk took center stage. Roleplay subroutine initiated, a cold, clinical part of his brain noted. Subject persona, Deku. Objective, infiltration and observation. Primary directive, maintain cover at all costs. He started the long walk toward the front doors, deliberately scuffing his sneakers on the gravel, keeping his head down and his shoulders hunched. He looked for all the world like a kid trying to make himself as small as possible. Before he could even reach the steps, the heavy oak doors swung inward silently. A man in a wheelchair sat framed in the doorway, a gentle, welcoming smile on his face. He wore a finely tailored tweed jacket and had a tartan blanket draped over his legs. It was Charles Xavier. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. The file had been explicit. Xavier was the most powerful telepath on the planet. He felt a primal instinct to shield his thoughts, to throw up the mental firewalls his shield trainers had drilled into him. But he fought it. Raising a mental shield to a master telepath would be like setting off a flare in a dark room. His only defense was to be exactly what he appeared to be. Izuku Midoriya, I presume. The man's voice was calm, resonant, with a warm, British accent that seemed to smooth over the rough edges of Izuku's anxiety. Welcome to the Xavier Institute. I am Professor Charles Xavier. We were expecting you. As Izuku met his eyes, kind, intelligent, and impossibly blue, he felt it. It wasn't a voice in his head, or a sudden vision. It was a pressure, a gentle but irresistible psychic weight settling over his consciousness. It was like standing at the bottom of a deep, clear ocean. He could feel the immense, crushing power all around him, yet it wasn't hostile. It was curious. It brushed against the surface of his thoughts, not trying to break in, but simply to get a sense of their shape and texture. It felt the churning sea of his fear, the frantic beat of his heart, the confusion of his new surroundings. It felt the persona. Izuku fought the urge to recoil. He let the professor's presence wash over him, focusing all his energy on the surface-level emotions. Scared. I'm scared. I don't know what's happening to me. This place is so big. I'm all alone. He broadcasted the thoughts like a mantra, a smoke screen of genuine adolescent terror to hide the cold, calculating agent beneath. Professor, Izuku stammered, the stutter coming easily. How did we know you were coming? Xavier finished for him, his smile widening slightly. Let's just say we have a way of finding those who need our help. Please come in. You must be tired from your journey. Xavier wheeled himself backward, and Izuku stepped across the threshold. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior, a grand foyer with a polished wood floor, a sweeping staircase, and a magnificent crystal chandelier hanging from the high ceiling. Sunlight streamed through a stained glass window above the landing, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the floor. It smelled of lemon polish, old books, and something else, something warm and alive. It smelled like a home. This is incredible, Izuku breathed, his awe genuine. It can be a bit overwhelming at first, Xavier said kindly. But you'll get used to it. The West Wing houses the classrooms and my study. The East Wing contains the dormitories and recreational areas. We try to provide an environment that is as much a home as it is a school. As Xavier began to lead him on a tour, Izuku's senses were on high alert. He noted the lack of visible staff, the quietness of the massive house. Every detail was being filed away. No visible support staff, cooks, cleaners. Implies students/staff are responsible, or automation is used. The latter is more likely. Mansion layout is sprawling, easily defensible with multiple choke points. Possible tactical advantage. They passed by a large, open doorway leading to a conservatory filled with an explosion of green. A young woman with startling white hair stood among the plants, her dark skin a beautiful contrast. She was tending to a collection of orchids, her touch impossibly delicate. As they approached, she looked up. Her eyes were a piercing, intelligent brown, and she held herself with a regal serenity that seemed at odds with her apparent age. Ororo, my dear, Xavier said. I'd like you to meet our newest student, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku, this is Ororo Monroe. Ororo wiped her hands on an apron and offered a warm smile. It is a pleasure to meet you, Izuku. Welcome to our home. Her voice was like a calm breeze, accented and melodic. Hi, Izuku mumbled, looking at the floor. He could feel her presence, a faint static charge in the air, a hint of ozone, like the air after a distant thunderstorm. Subject, Ororo Monroe. Apparent age, late teens. Power classification, suspected atmokinesis, weather manipulation. Her emotional state appears stable, serene. Low immediate threat. Potential for high-level destructive capability. Ororo is in charge of our gardens, Xavier explained. She has a unique gift for helping things grow. The plants appreciate a gentle hand, Ororo said, her eyes twinkling. As do new students. Don't worry, Izuku. It seems intimidating now, but you will find your place here. Her kindness was a physical blow, a direct hit to the armor of his deception. It was easy to lie to a faceless organization or a hostile target. It was infinitely harder to lie to someone who was offering genuine compassion. He just nodded, unable to form a coherent reply, and was grateful when the professor continued the tour. They moved on, heading toward what Xavier called the student lounge. As they rounded a corner, a young man with a ridiculously perfect build, wearing a pair of distinctive ruby quartz glasses, nearly walked into them. He was holding a stack of books and moved with an air of self-conscious importance. Scott, watch your step, Xavier said with gentle chiding. The young man, Scott Summers, stopped short. Sorry, Professor. I was just taking these back to the library. His eyes, hidden behind the strange glasses, fixed on Izuku. The friendly atmosphere immediately chilled by several degrees. Scott, this is Izuku Midoriya. He'll be joining us, Xavier introduced. Scott looked Izuku up and down, his posture stiff and formal. A new student? Professor, we didn't discuss this. His tone wasn't accusatory, but it was laden with a protective suspicion. He was the prefect, the captain of the team, and Izuku was an unscheduled, unvetted variable. Some things don't allow for lengthy discussion, Scott, Xavier replied smoothly. Izuku's abilities manifested, rather suddenly. He needs our guidance. Right, Scott said, his lips a thin line. He turned his attention back to Izuku, and even without seeing his eyes, Izuku felt like he was being x-rayed. Scott Summers. Welcome to the Institute. The words were correct, but the tone was anything but welcoming. It was a challenge. Subject, Scott Summers. Apparent age, late teens. Power classification, unknown, but glasses are clearly functional, likely a containment measure for an optical-based power. Psychological profile, rigid, follows protocol, highly protective of Xavier and the Institute. High suspicion level. Will likely be a primary obstacle to intelligence gathering. Nice to meet you, Izuku mumbled, his feigned nervousness making the interaction easier. Before the awkward silence could stretch too long, another voice, warm and bright, called out. Scott, are you going to stand there all day or are you going to help me with this? A red-haired girl with startlingly green eyes appeared, levitating a large, leather-bound armchair a few inches off the floor with a shimmering, pinkish aura. She was struggling slightly, her brow furrowed in concentration. I told you to ask Hank for help with that, Jean, Scott sighed, though his tone softened considerably when he spoke to her. And I told you I could do it myself, she retorted playfully. Her eyes fell on Izuku, and her face broke into a wide, welcoming smile. The armchair wobbled and dropped to the floor with a soft thud. Oh, sorry. Hi. I'm Jean Grey. She hurried over, extending a hand. Izuku took it tentatively. Her grip was firm, her hand warm. As their skin touched, Izuku felt a strange sensation, different from Xavier's psychic pressure. It was like a faint echo, a brief, confusing flash of his own tightly leashed emotions being reflected back at him. He saw a flicker of confusion in her brilliant green eyes. Izuku Midoriya, he said, pulling his hand back quickly. Jean is one of our most promising students, Xavier said. Her telekinetic abilities are developing at a remarkable rate. I'm still working on the heavy lifting, Jean said with a self-deprecating laugh. She looked at Izuku again, her head tilted. So you're new. What's your, you know? She wiggled her fingers, the universal sign for what's your power. I don't know, Izuku said, the lie tasting like ash. It just happened. It was an accident. I can't control it. This part, at least, felt true. The memory of the baseball, the shattering of his own bones from a power he didn't understand, was still fresh. Jean's expression softened into one of deep empathy. I remember that feeling. It's terrifying. Don't worry, you're in the best possible place for it. Subject, Jean Grey. Apparent age, late teens. Power classification, telekinesis, developing, possible low-level telepathy/empathy, detected emotional feedback on physical contact. Psych profile, open, empathetic, friendly. Potential complication. Her perceptive abilities may bypass standard deception techniques. She feels the dissonance, even if she can't name it. The tour concluded in the East Wing, where Xavier showed Izuku to his room. It was a comfortable, cozy space with a four-poster bed, a large oak desk overlooking a pristine lawn, and an attached bathroom. It was larger than his entire Shield Barracks apartment. Get yourself settled in, Xavier said from the doorway. Dinner is at 7 in the main dining hall. Ororo is an excellent cook. I'm sure the others would be happy to show you the way. He paused, his gaze seeming to look right through Izuku. I know this is all very new and frightening, Izuku. But I want you to know that you are safe here. This is a sanctuary, a place where you don't have to be afraid of who you are. The sincerity in his voice was absolute. For a terrifying second, Izuku almost believed him. He almost forgot the mission, forgot the call sign, forgot the cold purpose that had brought him here. He was just a scared kid, and this kind man was offering him safety. Then the agent took over again. It was a carefully constructed offer. An appeal to the exact emotions a frightened, newly manifested mutant would be feeling. It was textbook de-escalation and trust building. It was expert manipulation, whether benevolent or not. "Thank you, Professor," Izuku said, his voice barely a whisper. Xavier gave him one last, long look before pulling the door gently shut, leaving Izuku alone. The moment the lock clicked, Izuku's entire posture changed. The slump in his shoulders vanished. His gaze sharpened. He moved with a silent efficiency that was utterly at odds with the clumsy teenager he had been moments before. He swept the room for bugs, his fingers ghosting over the walls, the furniture, the light fixtures. He found nothing, as expected. The surveillance here was biological. He sat on the bed, the mattress soft beneath him, and took a slow, centering breath. The first phase was complete. He was in. But the pressure was immense. Xavier's psychic presence was a constant, low-level hum at the edge of his awareness. Scott's suspicion was a spotlight waiting for him to make a wrong move. Jean's empathy was a wild card that could unravel everything, and he still hadn't met all the staff. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Izuku's training screamed at him. It wasn't the sound of someone walking past. It was the sound of someone stopping, listening. He held his breath, straining his ears. He heard the faint, rhythmic sound of breathing. Heavy, raspy breathing, like that of an animal. Then he smelled it. A strange, complex scent. Stale cigar smoke, cheap whiskey, pine needles, and something else, something wild, musky, and vaguely metallic. His hand instinctively went to the small of his back, where the night-night gun would be, but he wasn't wearing it. It was hidden in a false bottom of his backpack. He was exposed. The doorknob began to turn. Slowly, Izuku scrambled to reset his posture, hunching over, making himself look startled as the door swung open. Standing there was a man who looked like he'd been carved out of granite and left out in the rain. He was short, but built like a fireplug, all corded muscle and raw power. He wore a flannel shirt, worn jeans, and a scowl that seemed permanently etched onto his rugged face. A day's worth of stubble covered his jaw, and his dark, wild hair was styled in two distinct peaks. It was Logan Wolverine, the Institute's mysterious combat instructor, whose file had been almost completely blacked out, save for a single, chilling word, unkillable. Logan didn't say anything. He just leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed, and looked Izuku over. His gaze was flat, predatory. His nostrils flared slightly. So, Logan's voice was a low, gravelly rumble, like stones grinding together. "You're the new runt." Izuku swallowed hard, his manufactured fear mixing with a very real and potent dose of it. "I am Izuku." Logan took a step into the room, and the door swung shut behind him. The space suddenly felt very, very small. He walked around Izuku, circling him like a wolf inspecting a new sheep in the fold. Izuku stayed perfectly still, his heart trying to hammer its way out of his chest. "Xavier's got a soft spot for strays," Logan grunted, stopping directly behind him. Izuku could feel the man's body heat. "But you're different." "I don't know what you mean," Izuku said, his voice trembling. Logan let out a short, harsh laugh. He moved to stand in front of Izuku again, leaning in close. The smell was overpowering now. Izuku could see the flecks of gray in his stubble, the network of tiny scars around his eyes. "The other kids," Logan said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "They come here, they reek of fear. Fear of themselves, fear of the world. I smell that on you, sure. It's there, on the surface, like cheap cologne." He leaned in closer, his nose just inches from Izuku's hoodie. "But underneath it, underneath all that oh gosh I am so scared crap, I smell something else." Logan's eyes, dark and feral, locked onto Izuku's. "You don't smell like a kid who's scared of his own powers. You smell like a government office, kid. Stale coffee, recycled air, and secrets. You smell like procedure and redacted files. So I'm gonna ask you one time, and you better not lie to me, 'cause I can smell a lie a mile away. What are you really doing here?" The directness of the attack was stunning. It bypassed all of Izuku's prepared defenses. This wasn't a psychic probe he could fool with surface thoughts, or an intellectual suspicion he could deflect with a clumsy persona. This was raw, animal instinct, and it had cut straight to the bone. Izuku's mind raced, cycling through 1,000 protocols and contingencies. Deny. Feign ignorance. Feign indignation. Break down. Cry. Before he could choose a path, the door opened again. It was Professor Xavier. He hadn't made a sound. Logan, Xavier's voice was still gentle, but it now carried a core of diamond-hard authority. That is enough. You are frightening our new guest. Logan didn't take his eyes off Izuku for a long moment. A silent battle of wills seemed to pass between him and the professor. Finally, with a low growl of frustration, Logan backed off. Whatever you say, Chuck, he snarled, turning for the door. He paused and shot one last, venomous look over his shoulder at Izuku. Just so you know, kid, I'll be watching you. Then he was gone, the scent of his presence lingering like a threat. Xavier wheeled himself fully into the room. I do apologize for that, Izuku. Logan's methods can be rather abrasive. He is fiercely protective of our students, and his instincts are rarely wrong. The unspoken addendum hung in the air. But are they wrong this time? I don't understand, Izuku said, finally letting a genuine tremor enter his voice. What did he mean? Government office? Xavier watched him, his expression unreadable. Logan has a unique, sensory palate. He associates certain places and people with distinct scents. He likely smelled the facility where your powers were catalogued after your incident. It's nothing to worry about. It was a plausible, elegant lie. It gave Izuku an out and smoothly papered over the confrontation. It also told Izuku that Xavier was now aware of the government connection, even if he was choosing to interpret it in a non-threatening way for now. The professor knew something was off. He had just been warned, and he was choosing to wait and see. The game had become infinitely more complex. Right, Izuku nodded, doing his best to look relieved. Why don't you get some rest? Xavier suggested, his tone once again warm and paternal. It's been a long day for you. After the professor left, Izuku locked the door and sagged against it, his legs suddenly weak. He slid down to the floor, his head in his hands. That was too close. Wolverine was a catastrophic variable he hadn't fully accounted for. His senses were a truth serum that Izuku had no defense against. He stayed there for a long time before forcing himself to his feet. He had a report to make. He retrieved the innocuous-looking ballpoint pen from his backpack. He went into the bathroom, turned on the shower to create white noise, and sat on the edge of the tub. He clicked the pen once. A tiny, almost invisible blue light flashed and then went out. The recorder was active. He brought the pen close to his lips and began to speak, his voice a barely audible murmur. Agent Midoriya, call sign Deku. First report, Project Chimera. Time, 1847 hours. He took a shaky breath. Infiltration successful. I am inside the Xavier Institute. I have made contact with the primary target, Charles Xavier, and 3 of his initial students, Aurora Monroe, Scott Summers, and Jean Grey. Initial profiles are as follows. Monroe, codename Storm, appears stable and is a potential non-hostile. Summers, Cyclops, is hostile to my presence and highly suspicious. He will require careful handling. Grey is an empath, a significant complication. She detects emotional dissonance. My cover may not hold under direct, prolonged interaction with her. All 3 display a high degree of loyalty to Xavier. He paused, the image of Logan's feral eyes flashing in his mind. The most immediate and severe threat to the mission is not Xavier, but a staff member identified as Logan or Wolverine. His file is incomplete, but his abilities include a hyperacute sense of smell that can apparently identify abstract concepts like government and detect lies. He has already confronted me and is openly hostile. He has compromised my cover's integrity. Professor Xavier intervened and provided a plausible explanation, but the suspicion has been planted. Wolverine is a primary threat and must be avoided or neutralized as a factor. I recommend an immediate deep dive on all available intelligence pertaining to this asset. He looked around the small, sterile bathroom, a shield-like environment inside this warm, inviting house. The primary target, Xavier, is a master of psychological manipulation. His telepathic presence is constant, a passive environmental factor. He projects an aura of benevolence and safety, which is highly effective. It is my preliminary assessment that this entire institute is a soft power projection. He is winning hearts and minds, starting with these powerful children. Whether this is for a benevolent or nefarious purpose is still undetermined. He clicked the pen twice. The recording stopped. He had his report. He would upload it later tonight via the burst transmission from his watch. Coulson would get it. Fury would read it, and they would know he was surrounded, outmatched, and that his cover was already starting to fray. He stood up and looked at his reflection in the mirror. The face staring back was pale and wide-eyed. The face of a scared kid. For the first time all day, there was no acting involved. He left the bathroom and walked to the large window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. On the sprawling lawn below, he could see them. Scott was firing a brilliant red beam from his eyes at a series of targets that popped up from the ground. Jean was beside him, deflecting stray shots with a shimmering pink shield. Aurora stood off to the side, a small, localized rain cloud watering a bed of roses while the rest of the lawn remained dry. They were laughing. They were children, playing with powers that could rewrite the laws of physics. Then, from a reinforced door at the side of the mansion, a section of the lawn opened up, revealing a descending staircase. A new figure emerged, large and covered in blue fur, his posture scholarly despite his beastly appearance. It was Hank McCoy, Beast, the school's scientist. He waved the others over, and one by one, they descended into the ground. A moment later, the lawn sealed itself shut, leaving no trace. The danger room. Izuku watched, his fingers pressed against the cool glass of the window. He was mesmerized. He was intimidated. He was watching the birth of a team. The birth of an army. His mission was clear. He had to know everything about them. He had to understand them, analyze them, and find their weaknesses. All while pretending to be one of them. A wolf in a flock of lions, pretending to be a lost sheep. The morning after his confrontation with Logan, Izuku felt as though he were walking on a wire suspended over a canyon. Every smile from Aurora felt like a test, every speculative glance from Jean a silent interrogation. Scott's overt suspicion was almost a comfort in its honesty, but the most unsettling presence was the one that was absent. Logan was nowhere to be seen, yet Izuku felt his predatory gaze from every shadow, every darkened window. He was being watched, and the constant, unnerving pressure was grinding away at the edges of his meticulously crafted persona. He picked at a bowl of oatmeal in the sun-drenched breakfast nook, forcing himself to eat. His mind, a relentless engine of analysis, was running threat assessments on a loop. Wolverine, threat level, critical, is the primary mission risk. His sensory abilities bypass conventional deception. Avoidance is the only viable strategy. Jean Grey, threat level, moderate, is an empathic variable. Emotional sincerity, even manufactured, is key. Scott Summers, threat level, low, is a manageable obstacle. His suspicion is procedural, not intuitive. Defer to his authority. Aurora Monroe, threat level, minimal, is a potential ally. Her empathetic nature appears genuine. Charles Xavier, threat level, indeterminate, is the endgame. His passive telepathy is a constant environmental hazard. Maintain fear-based mental signature at all times. It was exhausting. Being a scared, confused teenager was turning out to be far more draining than any advanced cryptology exam or combat simulation SHIELD had ever thrown at him. You have barely touched your food, Izuku. Professor Xavier's calm voice cut through his internal monologue. He wheeled himself to the table, a cup of tea steaming in his hand, his expression one of gentle concern. Sorry, Professor, Izuku mumbled, pushing a spoonful of lukewarm oatmeal around his bowl. Just a lot on my mind. Understandable, Xavier said, his eyes kind. Adjusting to a new home, to new abilities, it can be a turbulent time. In fact, I believe a demonstration might be in order, to help you understand what it is we do here. A way to show you that control is possible. A demonstration. The word sent a jolt of electricity through Izuku. His mind immediately went to the sealed lawn, the figures descending into the earth. A demonstration? He asked, his voice a mixture of feigned nervousness and genuine curiosity. Indeed, Xavier's smile was knowing. The others are about to begin a training session. I thought you might benefit from observing. It might help demystify the experience of having powers, show you that what feels like a curse can, with training and discipline, become a gift. Scott, who had been reading a book at the far end of the table, looked up, his brow furrowed behind his ruby glasses. Professor, with all due respect, is that wise? The danger room is not a spectator sport. On the contrary, Scott, Xavier replied smoothly. An outside perspective can be invaluable. And Izuku will be perfectly safe in the observation booth. Dr. McCoy will be joining us. The decision was made. Izuku felt a thrill of anticipation that was difficult to suppress. This was it. A direct look into their combat capabilities, their tactics, their limits. The value of this intelligence was immeasurable. He just had to remember his role. He was not a SHIELD analyst observing a field test. He was a prospective student, awed and intimidated. Dr. Hank McCoy met them at a heavy, reinforced door in the West Wing's sublevel. He was a mountain of a man, covered in a thick coat of blue fur, yet he moved with a surprising grace. He wore a pair of reading glasses perched on his broad nose and carried a data slate, giving him the paradoxical air of a linebacker who taught quantum physics. Ah, Professor! And young Mr. Midoriya. Hank's voice was a deep, erudite baritone. Excellent. The session parameters are loaded. A search and rescue simulation in a structurally unstable urban environment. Multiple hostile signatures. It should prove stimulating. He led them through the door and down a sterile, metallic corridor that could have been ripped directly from a SHIELD facility. The warm, homey atmosphere of the mansion was gone, replaced by the cold hum of industrial power. They arrived at a thick, armored window overlooking a vast, cavernous chamber. The danger room. It was a vast, empty cube, its walls, floor, and ceiling a grid of metallic gray panels. It was larger than any training facility Izuku had ever seen. Holographic projectors, force field emitters, matter compilers. The danger room can replicate nearly any environment or opponent we can conceive of, Hank explained, his eyes gleaming with intellectual pride. It allows our students to test their abilities to their absolute limit in a controlled, and most importantly, safe, environment. Below, on the floor of the grid, Scott, Jean, and Aurora were stretching, their colorful training uniforms a stark contrast to the room's monochrome sterility. Observation booth is this way, Hank said, leading them into a small, sealed chamber set into the wall. It was filled with consoles and monitors, a god's eye view of the arena below. Xavier wheeled himself to the master console. Begin simulation. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. The gray grid dissolved. One moment they were looking at an empty room. The next, they were staring down into the heart of a ruined cityscape. A skyscraper, its side torn open, loomed over a street littered with burning cars and rubble. The air filled with the digital scream of sirens and the rumble of unstable structures. It was utterly, terrifyingly real. Incredible, Izuku breathed, his face pressed against the armored glass. Objective is to locate and extract 3 civilian life signs, holograms, of course, from the upper floors before the structure collapses, Xavier explained. Complicating factor, the building is infested with robotic drones. Below, the team sprang into action. Aurora rose into the air on a gust of wind, her white hair flowing around her as she summoned a thick fog to obscure their approach. Scott, taking point, began methodically blasting a path through the debris, his optic blast carving precise lines through concrete and steel. Jean followed, her telekinetic aura shimmering as she stabilized a teetering section of wall. They were good. They were powerful. But Izuku's mind, honed by years of relentless analysis, immediately began to see the flaws, the inefficiencies, the wasted energy. It was a compulsion, a reflex he couldn't stop. He began to mutter, his voice a low, unconscious litany of tactical critique. No, the fog is too uniform, he whispered, his eyes tracking Aurora. It provides cover, but it also obscures their own line of sight. She should be creating localized pockets of mist, corridors of visibility for them while blinding the drones. His gaze shifted to Scott. His blast is too wide beam. He's causing too much collateral structural decay. A narrower, more focused pulse would be just as effective and wouldn't risk bringing the whole building down on their heads. He's using a sledgehammer when he needs a scalpel. Jean's triage shielding is reactive, not proactive, he continued, his muttering growing faster, more frantic, as if he were trying to solve a complex equation against a ticking clock. She's waiting for things to fall, then catching them. She should be identifying the primary stress points, that fractured support beam on the 12th floor, the overloaded rebar on the east corner, and reinforcing them before they fail. It's a waste of energy to catch 100 bricks when you can just brace the wall. Beside him, Hank McCoy had fallen silent. He slowly turned his large, blue head, his furry ears twitching, and stared at the muttering boy. He glanced at Professor Xavier, who hadn't taken his eyes off Izuku, a thoughtful, deeply intrigued expression on his face. Remarkable, Hank murmured to the professor, his voice barely audible over Izuku's continued analysis. His tactical assessment is instantaneous. He's processing variables, structural integrity, power output, strategic positioning, faster than the danger room's own diagnostic computer. Xavier didn't reply. He simply watched, his fingers steepled before him. He was seeing more than just tactical acumen. He was seeing an obsessive, desperate need to protect. Izuku wasn't critiquing their performance. He was trying to save them, even from a simulation. Every muttered correction was aimed at a single goal: 0 casualties, 0 mistakes. The simulation ended. The X-Men successfully extracted the civilians just as the holographic building collapsed in on itself. The gray grid reappeared. A successful run, Xavier announced through the comms. But inefficient. Your collateral damage projections were 27% higher than optimal. We will debrief in 5 minutes. He turned off the comms and looked at Izuku, whose face was flushed, suddenly realizing he'd been speaking his thoughts aloud. I am so sorry, Professor, Izuku stammered, horrified at his lapse in protocol. I didn't mean to. There is no need to apologize, Izuku, Xavier said, his voice soft. Your insights were illuminating. He turned to the console. Hank, could you hand me that data slate? I need to cross-reference the energy logs with. As Hank turned to retrieve the slate, Xavier's hand moved across the console. He input a short string of commands, his movements casual, almost accidental. A small, red light on the panel blinked once and went out. With the simulation's initial parameters, Xavier finished, taking the slate from Hank. Oh dear. He looked at the console, feigning mild annoyance. How clumsy of me. It seems I've initiated a Level 3 diagnostic protocol with the safety interlocks disengaged. I really must get these controls reconfigured. Before Hank could react, a deafening sound echoed through the chamber. Heavy blast doors, thicker than a bank vault's, slammed down over the observation booth window and the exit, plunging them into the emergency lighting's red glow. Simultaneously, another set of doors slammed shut on the main floor, sealing the exit from the danger room itself. Izuku was trapped. And he wasn't in the booth. In his eagerness to watch, he had been standing right at the edge of the observation platform, leaning over the railing. The blast door had come down behind him. He was on a small ledge, 5 feet above the main floor, inside the danger room proper. With Scott and Jean. Professor? Hank? Scott's voice called out, tight with alarm. What's going on? The room is locked down. A minor malfunction, Scott. Xavier's voice came over the intercom, sounding perfectly calm. Stay put. We'll have it sorted in a moment. But Izuku knew. He saw the flicker of the red light. He saw the accidental command sequence. This was no malfunction. This was a test. Directed at him. A panel in the center of the floor hissed open, and a machine rose on a hydraulic lift. It was sleek, black, and utterly menacing. It stood 8 feet tall on 3 multi-jointed legs, a single, glowing red optic eye sweeping the room. Its arms ended in a rotary plasma cannon and a multi-bladed pincer. The holographic shimmer was gone. This was real. Danger room asset -7 Hong Kong dollars. Hunter-killer is active, a calm, computerized voice announced. Safety protocols disengaged. Combat mode initiated. The red eye fixed on Jean, the closest target. Threat identified. Engaging. Jean, look out! Scott yelled. A torrent of crimson energy erupted from his glasses, slamming into the drone's chest. The blast, which had pulverized concrete in the simulation, barely scorched its armored plating. The drone staggered back, its optic eye swiveling to Scott. New primary threat identified, it droned. Izuku's mind went into overdrive. The agent, the analyst he had been suppressing, roared to the surface. He dropped from the ledge, landing in a trained crouch on the main floor. The impact jarred his knees, a painful reminder of his quirkless vulnerability. Scott, stop! Izuku yelled, his voice cracking with a fear that was only half fake. You can't brute force it. The chassis is too thick. Who put you in charge? Scott snarled, firing another blast that glanced harmlessly off the drone's shoulder. The hunter-killer's plasma cannon whined as it charged. Jean threw up a shield of pink telekinetic energy, but she was still drained from the simulation. The shield flickered like a dying light bulb. Jean, don't try to block it, deflect it. Izuku shouted, his voice gaining a desperate authority. He pointed at a pile of Durasteel rubble left over from the simulation. Use the debris. It can't target all of it at once. Create a barrier to funnel its movement to the left. Jean, her eyes wide with panic, hesitated for only a second. Scott's strategy was clearly failing. She gritted her teeth, and the pile of rubble lifted into the air, forming a crude, floating wall between them and the drone. The plasma blast hit the wall, melting a car-size hole through it but dissipating its energy. The drone's pincer arm lashed out, scything through the debris cloud. It was fast, impossibly fast. It's overcorrecting for the visual obstruction. Izuku analyzed aloud, his brain processing the drone's movements. It's relying on its motion trackers. Scott! The leg joints, the hydraulic actuators are less armored than the main body. Aim for the left leg joint. A precise shot, not a wide beam. Scott glared at him, then at the drone, which was relentlessly advancing through the floating junk pile. He gritted his teeth. Fine. He adjusted a dial on his visor, and the crimson beam narrowed to a razor-thin line. He fired. The beam lanced out, striking the drone's primary left leg at the exact point where the thigh met the knee. There was a high-pitched scream of tortured metal, and the leg seized up. The drone stumbled, its balance compromised. It's working! Jean gasped, her telekinetic barrier wavering. Don't let up! Izuku commanded, his fear forgotten, replaced by the cold fire of tactical command. Its balance is shot. It can't bring its main cannon to bear effectively. Jean, pin it. Use the biggest piece of debris you can manage. Aim for the damaged leg. Use its own weight against it. Jean let out a guttural cry of effort. A huge slab of concrete, the last remnant of the skyscraper, lifted into the air. With a final, desperate push, she slammed it down onto the drone's damaged leg. The sound of cracking metal and groaning hydraulics filled the room as the drone was pinned, its upper body thrashing uselessly. Now, Scott! Izuku yelled. The primary optic. It's the only exposed system. Full power. Scott didn't need to be told twice. He opened his visor to its widest setting, and a massive, uncontrolled torrent of pure concussive force erupted, engulfing the hunter-killer's head. The red eye flickered, and then with a deafening crack, the drone's head exploded in a shower of sparks and shrapnel. Its body went limp, pinned under the concrete slab. Silence. The only sounds were the ragged gasps of the three teenagers and the faint hum of the still locked-down room. Jean slumped to her knees, completely spent. Scott leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, his glasses askew. He looked from the destroyed drone to Izuku, his expression a mixture of disbelief, shock, and a grudging, newfound respect. How did you know all that? He panted. Before Izuku could even begin to formulate a lie, a groaning sound echoed from above. The drone's destruction, a real, physical explosion, had done more damage than the simulated one. A huge bank of coolant pipes and sealing machinery, shaken loose by the final blast, tore free from its moorings. It was falling directly towards Jean. She was exhausted, her telekinetic reserves utterly depleted. She looked up, her face a mask of terror, too drained to even scream. Scott was too far away. Another optic blast would hit her as well as the debris. There was no time for analysis. No time for a plan. Izuku's body moved on its own. His shield training gave him speed. His childhood dream gave him purpose. He sprinted across the floor, the desperate, primal scream of a hero tearing from his throat. Save her! He reached her a split second before impact. He didn't have the strength to carry her, only enough to put his shoulder into her side and shove hard. Get down! Jean tumbled away, crying out in surprise as she hit the floor. She rolled, landing just outside the shadow of the falling machinery. Izuku, his momentum spent, was left directly in its path. He looked up. The world slowed to a crawl. He saw the tangle of pipes and metal, the glint of severed wires, the sheer, crushing mass of it all. This was real. There were no safety protocols. This was death. A strange sense of calm washed over him. He thought of his mother. He thought of his dream. He thought of the All Might poster on his locker. I'm sorry, he thought. I couldn't even save one person. He closed his eyes. Boom! The sound was not an explosion. It was the sound of reality breaking. It was a sonic boom contained in a shoebox, an impossible concussion that vibrated through the very atoms of the floor. A hurricane-force wind tore past him, smelling of ozone and impossible power. Shrapnel, hot and sharp, peppered the air around him, but nothing touched him. He opened his eyes. The ceiling was gone. There was a gaping, jagged hole leading into the lab levels above. And the machinery that was supposed to crush him was simply gone. It had been atomized into a cloud of glittering metal dust that was now settling around him like grim confetti. Standing between him and the wreckage, his back to Izuku, was a man. Even in silhouette against the harsh emergency lights, the shape was unmistakable. The towering height. The impossibly broad shoulders. The two defiant tufts of blonde hair, like twin horns of victory. Have no fear, a voice boomed, a voice Izuku knew better than his own. Because I am here, All Might. He turned his head slightly, and his signature, beaming smile was visible in profile. It was real. He was real. He was here. A god had descended from a poster and stepped into Izuku's life. Then, the god faltered. A cloud of steam erupted from All Might's body, his muscles seeming to deflate like a punctured balloon. He coughed, a racking, painful sound, and when he turned fully, the hero was gone. In his place stood a skeletal man, swimming in a costume that was now several sizes too large. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken into deep, dark sockets. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, spattering onto the white of his uniform. Ah, damn it, the skinny man rasped, his voice a pale shadow of the boom from seconds before. Cut it a little too close with that one. Pushed too hard on the way here. The blast doors hissed open. The alarms went silent. Xavier, Hank, and Aurora rushed in, their faces masks of shock. They stared at the hole in the ceiling, the destroyed drone, the skeletal stranger, and the three stunned teenagers on the floor. All Might? Hank breathed, his scientific mind struggling to process the scene. Scott and Jean stared, their mouths agape, at the emaciated man who had just appeared from nowhere and saved Izuku's life with a single, cataclysmic punch. But Izuku only had eyes for the hero. He was seeing two images at once, the godlike symbol of peace who had just saved him, and the frail, broken man who now stood in his place. His analytical mind, which had so brilliantly dissected the danger room, was short-circuiting, unable to reconcile the two realities. The skinny man, All Might, wiped the blood from his lips with the back of his hand. His bright blue eyes, still possessing a faint echo of their heroic fire, swept the scene. They passed over the stunned X-Men, the destroyed drone, the hole in the ceiling, and finally, they landed on Izuku. He saw the small, quirkless boy on the floor, trembling not from the near-death experience, but from the sheer, overwhelming shock of the rescue. He saw the boy who had, without a shred of power to his name, just used his mind to defeat a military-grade weapon and his body to shield another from certain death. In Izuku's wide, terrified green eyes, All Might saw a reflection of something he hadn't seen in a very long time. He saw the same reckless, selfless, heroic fire that had once burned in his own heart before the injury, before the time limit, before the weight of the world had begun to crush him. He took a shaky step toward Izuku, ignoring the others in the room. He knelt down, his lanky frame unfolding awkwardly, and looked the boy right in the eye. "Young man," he coughed, his voice raspy but intense. "That was the most foolish, reckless, and heroic thing I have ever seen. What is your name?" The immediate aftermath of All Might's arrival was a symphony of controlled chaos. The danger room, usually a sterile environment of simulated threats, had become the epicenter of a crisis that was spiraling out into the real world. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, melted metal, and the coppery tang of All Might's blood. Izuku was still on the floor, his mind a maelstrom of conflicting data streams. The analyst in him was screaming, a frantic internal monologue of mission failure and catastrophic compromise. Unscheduled variable insertion, All Might. Status critical. Mission integrity, null. Cover annihilated. My proximity to the symbol of peace will trigger every red flag in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s global network. Fury will pull me. The project is over. But the boy in him, the child who had watched countless videos of this man saving people with an indomitable smile, was simply broken. To see his idol, the pillar of the world, deflate into this skeletal, wounded man was like watching the sun flicker and die. It was a truth so profound and terrible that his brain refused to fully process it. "Everyone, stay calm." Professor Xavier's voice sliced through the stunned silence, his telepathic authority a palpable force that settled over the room like a weighted blanket. He wasn't just speaking, he was projecting an aura of absolute command, a psychic bomb on the raw nerves of everyone present. "Hank, see to Jean and Scott. Ororo, help me with our guest. Izuku, stay where you are." Hank McCoy, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his shock, rushed to Jean's side, checking her for injuries. Scott, still leaning against the wall, could only stare at the gaunt man who was supposedly All Might, his rigid worldview crumbling. Ororo moved to the skeletal man's side, her expression a mixture of awe and deep concern, offering a steadying arm which he gratefully accepted. That's really him?" Scott stammered, pointing a trembling finger. "All Might?" In a manner of speaking, the skinny man rasped, managing a weak, self-deprecating smile. "Think of me as the after-picture in a very depressing before and after ad." A small, high-pitched beep emanated from Izuku's wrist. He glanced down at his watch, the S.H.I.E.L.D.-issued comms unit. A single, frantic message was scrolling across the tiny display, sent from Coulson on a priority channel that bypassed normal protocols. Code Jotun. All Might detected at your location. Energy signature off the charts. What the hell is going on, DKU? Report. Now, Izuku's blood ran cold. A code Jotun was reserved for encounters with beings of godlike power, Thor, Captain Marvel, and the top-tier Omega-level mutants. And All Might. S.H.I.E.L.D. wasn't just aware, they were scrambling fighter jets and deploying satellite surveillance. The Triskelion was likely on full lockdown. He had to respond. He had to control the narrative. But how? What possible explanation could there be for the world's one hero smashing through the roof of a clandestine mutant school to save a supposedly quirkless nobody? Xavier seemed to sense his internal panic. He wheeled over, placing a calming hand on Izuku's shoulder. His psychic touch was gentle, not probing, simply a quiet signal. "Be still. Let me handle this," Hank Xavier said, his voice firm. "This incident is to be classified at the highest level. Omega Alpha. No one outside this room is to know what happened here. The malfunction was a localized power surge that caused a minor structural failure. Is that understood?" Hank nodded grimly. "Of course, Professor. Ororo, please escort our guest to the infirmary. He is injured." Xavier's gaze met the skinny man's. A silent conversation passed between them, a flash of understanding from one great man to another. The symbol of peace was wounded, and his secret was bleeding out on the floor of Xavier's school. "I'm fine, really," All Might protested weakly, but his knees buckled, and he would have fallen if not for Ororo's strong grip. "Just overdid it a bit." As Ororo helped the frail hero limp towards the infirmary, Xavier turned his full attention to Izuku. His blue eyes were piercing, seeing far more than the boy was comfortable with. "Izuku, I will need to speak with you. But first." He nodded towards a gaping hole in the ceiling. We have a security issue to contain. With a quiet hum, massive storm shields began to slide into place over the hole, sealing the danger room once more, but this time, sealing the secret in. Xavier was locking down his home, not from the world, but for the sake of the man in his infirmary. He was protecting All Might's secret from S.H.I.E.L.D., from the government, from everyone. In that moment, Izuku saw a glimpse of the professor's true power, not just his telepathy, but his immense influence and decisiveness. While Xavier coordinated the lockdown, Izuku found a quiet corner, his back to the others. His fingers flew across the face of his watch, composing a reply to Coulson. He had seconds to craft a lie that was big enough to contain a miracle. Message to Handler Coulson: stand down all assets. Repeat, stand down. All Might's presence is coincidental. His arrival was not related to my position. He tracked a unique energy signature from the danger room malfunction and intervened under the assumption of a public threat. He has sustained injuries from overexertion and is being treated on-site by Institute staff. His secret identity appears compromised to Institute leadership, but they are cooperating to maintain his security. I am uninjured. I will provide a full report at the next scheduled upload. Do not, I repeat, do not make contact or approach the Institute. You will escalate a stable situation into an international incident. Deku out. He sent the message, his heart pounding. It was a tissue-thin lie, full of holes. But it was the only play he had. He was banking on two things: S.H.I.E.L.D.'s institutional fear of accidentally provoking All Might, and Coulson's personal trust in him. He had just gone from being an agent following orders to an agent giving them. He had drawn a line in the sand, placing himself between S.H.I.E.L.D. and the Xavier Institute. It was an act of borderline treason, and he knew it. But the alternative, a S.H.I.E.L.D. strike team descending on the mansion to secure a wounded All Might, was unthinkable. Izuku. Xavier's voice was quiet beside him. The professor had dismissed the others, and now it was just the two of them in the silent, damaged room. You acted with incredible bravery today, Xavier said. You saved Jean's life, at great risk to your own. I just did what anyone would do, Izuku mumbled, defaulting to his cover. No, Xavier said, his voice gentle but firm. Not just anyone. A hero. It seems I am not the only one who noticed. He nodded in the direction of the infirmary. All Might has requested to speak with you, alone. The walk to the infirmary was the longest of Izuku's life. The mansion's familiar corridors now felt alien, charged with a new and terrifying significance. Every step took him further away from his mission and deeper into a reality he was not equipped to handle. The infirmary was a clean, white room, smelling of antiseptic and filled with advanced medical equipment that looked far beyond standard hospital grade. Hank McCoy was there, studying a series of complex readouts on a monitor with a frown. His vitals are paradoxical, Hank said to Xavier as they entered. His respiratory system is severely compromised, and there are signs of massive, repeated internal trauma. Yet his cellular regeneration is off the charts. It's as if his body is simultaneously destroying and rebuilding itself at an accelerated rate. I've never seen anything like it. On a bed in the center of the room, the skinny man sat propped up against a few pillows. He had been given a simple gray sweatsuit, and the fabric hung loosely on his skeletal frame. The heroic fire in his eyes had dimmed to embers, but they glowed with a fierce intelligence as he watched Izuku approach. Xavier exchanged a meaningful glance with Hank. Perhaps we should give them some privacy. The two older men quietly exited, closing the door behind them, leaving Izuku alone with the broken symbol of peace. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. All Might, or Toshinori Yagi, as Izuku knew was his real name from a file so heavily classified that even accessing it had put him on a watch list, studied him with an unnerving intensity. You're Corkless, aren't you, kid? Toshinori said, his voice a gravelly rasp. The direct question hit Izuku like a physical blow. He froze. This was the one truth he was not supposed to reveal to anyone. It was the foundation of his value to S.H.I.E.L.D., the core of his blank slate status. I don't know what you mean, he stammered, the denial weak and reflexive. Toshinori let out a dry, humorless chuckle that turned into a hacking cough. He pressed a hand to his side, wincing. Kid, I've spent my life fighting alongside and against people with every power imaginable. I can feel it. The energy, the hum, the quirk factor that everyone gives off. You're quiet. There's nothing there. Just a normal, terrified human being who ran headfirst into a falling pile of metal to save someone else. Izuku's defenses crumbled. He couldn't lie to this man. It felt like a sacrilege. He looked down at the floor, his shoulders slumping in defeat. A single, silent nod was his only answer. I thought so, Toshinori said softly. He gestured to the chair beside his bed. Sit down, young man. It seems you and I have a lot to talk about. Izuku sat, perching on the edge of the chair as if ready to bolt at any moment. Toshinori took a deep, rattling breath. 5 years ago, he began, his voice taking on a distant, storyteller's quality, I fought a villain. Not just any villain. A monster. He did this, slowly, he lifted the hem of his sweatshirt. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. The left side of the hero's torso was a ruin, a massive, swirling vortex of scar tissue, puckered and mangled, radiated out from a central point just below his ribs. It was as if a bomb had gone off inside him, and his skin was the crater it had left behind. He destroyed my stomach and one of my lungs, Toshinori said, his voice flat, devoid of self-pity. I've had surgery after surgery. The damage is permanent. Now, I can only be a hero for about 3 hours a day. The rest of the time, I'm this. He gestured to his own emaciated form. The Great All Might, a man who has to watch the clock before he can save people. He let the shirt fall. The silence in the room was heavy, filled with the weight of this world-shattering secret. The world needs a symbol of peace, he continued, his gaze locking onto Izuku's. It needs a pillar, someone who saves people with a smile, to show them that everything will be okay. But I am crumbling. I have been searching for a successor. Someone to inherit my power. Izuku's mind reeled. Inherit his power? Quirks can't be passed on. It's a genetic impossibility. Is he delirious? Is this a side effect of his injury? As if reading his thoughts, Toshinori said, my quirk is a special case. It is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next, growing stronger with each new user. It is the crystallization of power, a quirk that stockpiles strength. Its name is One for All, One for All. The name echoed in the silent room, filled with a mythic resonance. It is the power to save, Toshinori said, his voice ringing with conviction. But it can only be passed to another. It cannot be taken. And the vessel must be worthy. They must possess a body strong enough to handle the raw power, and more importantly, a spirit that is truly heroic. The kind of spirit that moves your body to act before you even have time to think. He leaned forward, the intensity in his sunken eyes burning bright. Today, in that room, I saw it. I saw a scared, quirkless boy who didn't hesitate. You had a brilliant tactical mind, yes. I felt the tail end of Xavier's probe. I know you dissected that machine. But when it mattered, when a life was on the line, you didn't analyze. You acted. You sacrificed yourself without a second thought. You, more than anyone I have ever met, have the heart of a true hero. Izuku was shaking his head, unable to comprehend the words he was hearing. No, you don't understand. I'm nobody. I'm a spy. I'm here under false pretenses. I'm lying to everyone. I'm not a hero. The confession tumbled out, a desperate, broken whisper. Toshinori didn't even blink. A spy? For who? The government? Shield? He waved a dismissive hand. I don't care about that. I care about what I saw. You think heroes are perfect? You think they don't have secrets or make hard choices? Every hero wears a mask, kid. Your lies, your mission, what is their purpose? To stop a war, Izuku stammered, the core objective of Project Chimera laid bare. To get information to stop people from killing each other over this X gene. To save people, Toshinori finished for him, a slow smile spreading across his gaunt face. See? Even your lies serve a heroic purpose. You're just taking the long way around. He held up his hand, his long, bony fingers trembling slightly. I have been searching for so long. I have met pro-heroes, soldiers, the best and brightest the world has to offer, but they all had power of their own. Their heroism was, in part, a product of their abilities. But your heroism is pure. It comes from who you are, not what you can do. The room was spinning. This was his childhood dream, the one he had buried under years of pain, cynicism, and SHIELD protocol, rising from its grave to stare him in the face. It was impossible. It was a fantasy. My power, one for all, requires a strong body, Toshinori said. But it also requires an empty vessel. Someone without a quirk of their own, so the power doesn't tear their body apart. A quirkless person, like you? He looked Izuku straight in the eye, and his voice, though raspy, resonated with the absolute power of the symbol of peace. Young man, your dream can become a reality. I deem you worthy of my power. My quirk is yours if you will accept it. Izuku stared, his mind completely blank. It was a catastrophic complication for his mission. It was a betrayal of SHIELD. It was a power he would have to hide from the X-Men who were already suspicious of him. It was a lie on top of a lie on top of a lie. It was an anchor that would drown him. It was everything he had ever wanted. Tears streamed down his face, silent and hot. They weren't tears of joy or sadness. They were tears of overwhelming, crushing release. The dam of a lifetime of pain and longing had just broken. Yes, he whispered, the word a puff of air, a prayer. Yes, I accept. Toshinori's smile became genuine, reaching his tired eyes. Good. That's what I wanted to hear. He coughed. Now for the less than glamorous part. In order to inherit the power. He plucked a single, blonde strand of hair from his head. You have to eat this. Izuku stared at the hair held between Toshinori's thumb and forefinger. What? It requires a voluntary intake of my DNA, Toshinori explained with a completely straight face. So, eat it. An hour later, Izuku sat on his bed, the door to his room locked. The hair was gone, swallowed with a gulp of water and a profound sense of the absurd. He felt nothing, no sudden surge of power, no lightning in his veins. He just felt a lingering sense of unreality, and the phantom taste of All Might's hair conditioner. His watch buzzed again. A new message from Coulson. Your report is thin, Deku. The director is furious. He wants you pulled. I bought you 48 hours. I told him your proximity to All Might makes you a temporary asset in a new capacity, monitoring him. It's a weak play. You need to give me something concrete, or you're coming home in a bag. The pressure was immense. He was lying to SHIELD about his purpose, and now he was about to lie to them about possessing the single most powerful quirk on the planet. He was lying to the X-Men about who he was, and now he had a secret that would make Logan's suspicions seem trivial. He was a man standing on two boats, and they were drifting further and further apart. He pulled out his old, analog notebook. The one filled with his hero analysis. He opened it to a fresh page. The heading he wrote was not a SHIELD designation. It was a title born of hope and terror, Project, One for All. Underneath it, he began to write, his analytical mind kicking back into gear, this time directed at himself. Subject, Izuku Midoriya. New variable, Quirk One for All OFA. Nature, stockpiled kinetic energy. Transmissible. Current output, 0%. Activation method, unknown. All Might states it requires time to take root in the new vessel. Hypothesis. The power is biological, integrated via DNA transfer. It likely needs to permeate my cellular structure. This process could take hours, days, or weeks. He paused, chewing on his pen. He was a scientist with a sample size of one, himself. He needed to understand this power, control it, before it manifested. He couldn't afford an accidental manifestation like the one in his cover story. If he suddenly leveled a building, not even Xavier's silver tongue could explain it away. Control strategy. Must develop a method for granular power distribution. If the power is 100% or nothing, my body will be destroyed. All Might's injuries are proof of the strain, even on a prepared body. I need a regulator. A percentage-based output system. His pen flew across the page, sketching diagrams of the human body, circulatory systems, nerve clusters. He wasn't just a spy anymore. He was a test pilot for the most dangerous engine ever built. A soft knock came at his door. Izuku froze, shoving the notebook under his pillow. He wiped his face, smoothed his clothes, and took a deep breath, forcing the terrified analyst and the burgeoning hero back down, resurrecting the scared, clumsy teenager. Why, yes? It's Jean. Her voice came through the door, soft and concerned. Professor Xavier sent me. He said, well, he said you had a rough day and might want someone to talk to. He opened the door. Jean stood there, holding 2 mugs of what smelled like hot chocolate. Her green eyes were filled with a sincere sympathy that made Izuku's stomach twist with guilt. Can I come in? She asked. He nodded numbly and stepped aside. She came in and sat on the edge of his desk chair, handing him a mug. The warmth spread through his cold hands. That was the craziest thing I've ever seen, she said, her voice low. First the drone, and then you, and then him. She shook her head in disbelief. Are you okay? You were right underneath all that. I'm fine, Izuku said, taking a sip of the hot chocolate. It was sweet and rich. All Might, he saved me. You saved me first, she corrected, looking him right in the eye. You pushed me out of the way. You would have been, if he hadn't shown up. The weight of that realization hung between them. Izuku just shrugged, looking down into his mug. It was nothing. It wasn't nothing, she insisted. Her gaze was intense. You know, when I first met you I felt, I don't know, something confusing, a lot of fear, but something else underneath it, something strong and walled off. But just now? When you were shouting orders in the danger room? And when you pushed me? That wall was gone, I felt. It was like standing next to a furnace. Just pure, absolute determination. She was an empath. She had felt his true nature, the core of him that his lies couldn't hide. The agent. The hero. He had to deflect. I was just scared. I guess adrenaline took over. Jean seemed to accept this, but a thoughtful frown remained on her face. Maybe. Anyway, the professor wanted me to tell you that All Might is resting. He'll be staying here for a few days, under our protection, until he's recovered. His presence here is a secret no one can ever know. I understand, Izuku said. She stood up to leave, pausing at the door. Izuku, whatever that power is that you have, the one you can't control, don't be afraid of it. Professor Xavier can help you. We all can. You're not alone here. She gave him a small, reassuring smile and then left, closing the door softly behind her. Izuku sank onto his bed, the hot chocolate forgotten. You're not alone here. The words were meant to be a comfort, but to him, they were a condemnation. He had never been more alone in his entire life. He pulled the shield pen from his pocket. He needed to make a report. His falsified report. He had to tell Coulson that All Might's intervention was a fluke, that he was fine, that everything was under control. He clicked the pen once. The tiny blue light blinked. He opened his mouth to speak the lie, and then, he felt it. It started as a faint warmth in the pit of his stomach, where he digested the hair. It wasn't a burn, it was a glow. A nascent fire. The warmth spread, following his veins, a gentle current of energy flowing through his entire body. It was a soft, crackling hum, like a power line coming to life. It converged in his heart, a tiny, brilliant star of impossible power igniting where there had once been nothing, one for all. It had taken root. He looked at his hands, which were now trembling for an entirely new reason. They were no longer the hands of a quirkless analyst. They were the hands of a hero. The hands of a liar. They were weapons he didn't know how to fire, tools he didn't know how to use. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. He clicked the pen off without saying a word. His report to S.H.I.E.L.D. could wait. He had a much more important analysis to conduct first. He was no longer just a spy in a school for mutants. He was a boy with a god's power burning inside him, and he had absolutely no idea what to do next.